Hi, I'm George Floresco, George Floresco. We're in Winnipeg at the Union Center on Broadway Avenue right now. It's February 11th. 1975, I started working at Canada Post as a postal clerk in the Winnipeg mail processing plant in downtown Winnipeg. And it was a very tumultuous time in post office history and, well, labor history. I started working in March, and there's a probation period where you basically have to watch out you don't get fired without cause. And then when I got off probation, a week or so after that, I was on a 6-week strike at Canada Post. And the issue was obviously money. Wages are always an issue, but it was also technological change. And to put things in context, it was only 10 years before that when there was a national wildcat strike by postal workers who didn't have the right to strike and who wanted to have right to collective bargaining, and they didn't even have that. They were things that they were barred from bargaining. So there was a push by a lot of new people to overthrow the old leadership of the union, which was very compliant with the company, and they went on what turned out to be a national strike. It was led in the major cities. I think it was Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and then spread out to others, where they gained the right to strike and the right to collective bargaining. And they amended the labor law to include them with those rights. Following that, there was negotiations for collective agreements. There was a push then also to bring in part-time postal workers who were excluded from the union originally, to bring them into CUPW. And the Canadian Union of Postal Workers was born in the early 70s as a union. And the corporation moved forward with its implementing technological change, because they wanted to save money on labor costs. They wanted to improve the efficiency of processing letter mail. So they brought in new equipment to deal with this and replace the traditional mail sorters that were doing by manual sortation. And naturally, to save labor costs, you want to pay people less. So this new equipment involved machines where letters would drop in front of a person. They would use their right hand to key in the postal code that was just being introduced, and they wanted people to speed up and work faster. But they wanted to pay them a lower wage rate than the traditional postal workers. So the union said, no way, if you want to bring this equipment in, we'll look at it, but you don't pay these people less. And I don't think it was by coincidence, but most of these people doing the coding work were women. And the approach the employer took at the time was, women don't deserve to get paid as much as men, which is a sad thing to say, but it's actually still like that today, so it's not surprising. So there was a 2-week wildcat strike, national wildcat strike, and this was national. There was no doubt about it that workers across the country went out on this issue because they saw this as a way of Canada Post trying to go after them in the future by reducing their wages and benefits. So in the context of 1975, when I started, they had just come off a 2-week wildcat the year earlier, and people were ready to go because the issues were big. They saw the technology coming in, and they saw the corporation using the chance, and the government using the chance to reduce the workforce even more and to cut the wages of people by bringing in this equipment. So for 6 weeks, we were on the picket line. It was, I think we started in the middle of October, and it ended in the beginning of December. So we had the fall weather, we had the winter weather, so we went from relatively nice weather to snow, and it was tough on people, really tough to go out there and be picketing every day, and we didn't get a lot of strike pay. It was minimal. So people looked for other jobs and people did what they could, but it was a tough time. And then finally there was a settlement reached, a negotiated settlement, and that was put to the membership for a vote. And a lot of members weren't happy with this settlement. They thought we should be getting more. But it went to a vote, and by a national vote, it was adopted by 51%. You can't get much closer than that. But that set the stage then for the future, because workers realized they had a way of fighting back, and that set the stage for a lot of other things. So when I look back on what happened in that 75 strike, I thought it was very important to see how a collective approach to things could work. Since then, I tried to keep track of how many strikes I've been on, and it's probably been around 10 or 12 over the years, and I retired in 2019. I've been on strikes that were legal, strikes that were illegal. I've been out when we defied legislation. I've been out when we complied with legislation. I've been out where there's been no strike and we've negotiated collective agreements. So it's a mixed bag. Each one is unique, but there's always a trend when you're dealing with a government-owned business. And that is, there's no incentive for Canada Post to negotiate at the bargaining table if they know the government will step in with back-to-work legislation or other means like they're doing now to force a settlement. And that's the problem, that you don't get true negotiations unless the other side is willing to negotiate. And that's what we've tried to impress upon people. So following the 1975 round of bargaining and strike activities, the union knew that they would be in for a tough fight the next time around. The membership also realized that it was going to be tough. And so the union embarked on a campaign of putting out information to all the members about what the issues were and to try and prepare people for the upcoming fight. And it was a big fight. It was a Liberal government at the time that was eager to seek revenge on us for what we had done earlier. At least that's how we felt. And so when we went on strike, they introduced back-to-work legislation. And it was something new for them because they took the approach that they were going to punish the leadership of the union. And so when the decision was made to defy, and that wasn't a decision that I understand was made easily at the national level, and it was a tough one for the membership in the local. I was the shop steward in the local then. And when that decision was made, the government responded very quickly. They arrested our national leadership. We had a national executive board. They were all arrested. They were all charged with defying the legislation and not ordering the membership back to work. We were expecting to be arrested in the big locals as well. And in fact, in Winnipeg, we took extreme step of taking all our files from the strike and all the correspondence that we received from the National Union and hiding it in another office in the building that we had our office in, because we didn't want the RCMP to get it. The result was that the union said, we're not going back. And the government said, you have to go back. And there was a problem. The membership were scared. And one thing you learn very quickly is that even though you have the strength of the membership, the boss has the strength of employment and wages and security. And they use that, and they use fear. So they had their friends in the right-wing media, or in the mainstream media probably, to put out stories saying postal workers are going to be fired. Postal workers are going to lose their pensions. And they drove this fear out there. And we had a lot of members who were afraid they're going to lose their pensions. Now, in everybody's mind, losing your pension has a different interpretation, because you can't lose your pension. What can happen is if you get fired, you get a refund of your premiums, or you get a reduced pension. You don't get your full pension because you don't work a full time period. But in people's minds, losing a pension is like they rip it out of your gut, or they rip your job out and you've got nothing anymore. And when people have invested 15, 20, 25 years employment in a company, to them that's a huge, huge change. So we had members who were worried about that. There's always a segment of a membership that says, I don't want to be on strike. And there's a small segment that says, I need the money, I need to go back. So we knew all of this was going on. But for some of us, we were going to follow the lead of the union. And if the union says we're defying, we're going to defy. How it works out on the street and in the workplace is a different matter sometimes. And I know myself and a few of the other activists in the local kept the picket line up. And what that meant was we were standing in front of the employees' main entrance at the old Winnipeg plant, and we had people we work with on a daily basis, comrades in the workplace, men and women, who were coming up there and said, we want to go into work. And we looked them in the eye and we told them, no, you're not going in. And it got quite hot. There were physical altercations where some of these guys, and they were big guys, simply tried to push their way through us. And we just stood there and we locked arms and we had our picket signs on and said, nobody's going in. And it got ugly. It got ugly in the workplace later too, because we had to work with these people and some of them were friends. So there was a price to pay for that, but it was a price well worthwhile. Now, eventually we did go back. The union made a decision, and so we dropped the picket lines and we went back. And then what they did with our national president, Jean-Claude Perrault, was they charged him. The charges against all the other leadership were dropped. They charged him, and he was sentenced to, 6 months in jail for defying the legislation, because the government wanted to teach us a lesson. What they did was made a martyr out of Jean-Claude. It was incredible. He spent time, and I forget the name of the facility, someplace in Toronto or Ottawa. I guess it was in Ottawa. He spent time in jail, and the one benefit was that all the guards are all unionized, and so they took it upon themselves to make sure that Jean-Claude was not harmed in any way. They looked after him. He had a relatively easy time, but he said it was the best rest he'd ever had. He never had a rest like that. But the union kept on going. And part of the union's operations at the national level was to have regular board meetings. So they wanted to have a board meeting, and they wanted Jean-Claude to be there, but they wouldn't release him for a board meeting. So the rest of the leadership went to jail and had the board meeting in jail with the guards supervising it. And it was a bit unique in that they said we'd never had a union meeting in jail before. That was great. And then after, when he was released, he got off early, I guess, for good behavior. When he was released, one of the guards commented that they had never had a prisoner who had received so much mail in their history. The mail just poured in to him. He was getting letters from people, postcards, then they still had telegrams or whatever they used then, because there was no fax machines, no internet, nothing. But he was getting messages constantly. They were dumping loads of mail for him in jail, and he read through them all. And he said he tried to answer most of them, but he couldn't answer them all, and because sometimes people, you got some derogatory comments from some people, but the vast majority of them were supportive letters. The union got support from union locals all across the country. And I still have the magazine, the Union magazine, that listed all of the union locals that contributed money to our cause, for our defense fund, for JC's legal fees, and it's just huge. So coming off of that, we learned some lessons about, defying legislation is far more than simply standing out in the street. You've got to build support with allies. You've got to build support in the public. You've got to educate people on the issues. You need to be able to talk to people about why you're taking this action. It's not just a simple matter of defying. You need a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you're in trouble. So it was a good lesson for us. And I think that it brought out a lot of new leadership in the union. And it helped us because we went into bargaining in early 1980, where we signed a collective agreement without a strike. And it was a short-term contract. And that then led to 1981. And this would have been after the short-term conservative minority government, and then with the return of Pierre Trudeau as Prime Minister. So he still had some hard feelings towards us because he was the Prime Minister back in 1975. And the issue that we brought forward at that round of negotiation, one of the big issues was maternity leave. The fact that women who decide to have a child and take time off couldn't get time off or couldn't get paid time off. And we decided we were going to take that issue on as a union. And there were a number of other issues involved, but that was the issue that hit the media. And we were quite prepared to defend it, to talk about it. And naturally, we got attacked by the right wing, attacked by the business community, because the business community was terrified that if we won paid maternity leave, it would be a ripple effect throughout Canada and throughout the workplaces. And they were right. There was a ripple effect. There was only, I believe, one collective agreement in Quebec that had paid maternity leave, but that was seen as an anomaly, and it was contained, right? That's Quebec, that's different there. And for us to come and say we want a national agreement that has this in was terrifying to corporate Canada. But we persisted, and it was tough in the locals too, because I know I was staffing the local office, taking phone calls from the public, because we never turned down a phone call. At least my approach was never turn down a phone call from the public, even if they're screaming at you, because it was a chance to talk about the issues. And if you talked reasonably to them, you could convince a lot of people. And we were attacked, saying that this is just a plot. All the women in the union just want to have babies. Like, that's so ridiculous. The composition, the demographic breakdown of the female membership of our union was just like everywhere in society. There's young people, there's old people. There's people who want to have children, people who don't want to have children, people who have had their children already and aren't going to have any more. So to say that all women were going to be using this was ridiculous. We had some of our own members who said, why are we fighting for women? But we persisted, and we were able to be successful in this, after 6 weeks on the picket line again, to be successful in obtaining paid maternity leave with top up to 93% of your wages. And it set a trend, and it spread like wildfire across the country. So it showed that we could negotiate something that's a benefit for our members, but also a benefit for society, by taking a strong stand and by convincing people, slowly sometimes, but convincing people that it's a just cause. So there's far more to having a good workplace than negotiations and going on strike. There's control of the workplace, and when I say control of the workplace, what I'm talking about is, on the day-to-day basis, being able to establish a union presence in the workplace where representatives of management cannot run wild over the membership. And it may vary from industry to industry, from workplace to workplace, but my experience at Canada Post was it was rampant. And part of that is the history of how the post office staffed themselves. And this is going back, but following World War II, when a lot of the military were returned to Canada and needed jobs, Canada Post, the government, gave preference to veterans. People who were officers generally went into management. The regular soldiers became the workers. And what they tried to do was instill a transition of that same mentality of officer versus soldier into the post office, and they tried to run it like the military. When I started in '75, some of the fellows told me about this, and I just thought they're crazy. But man, you watch them after a while, it was like that. You follow the orders, and that's the way it was. And that's why the union grew in strength in the 60s and 70s, because of that approach by management, that we're running it like the military, and people weren't going to put up with it. When I started, I worked on the midnight shift. There was about 100 people working on that shift on one floor of the processing plant. And I bet our average age was around 25. So there's a lot of young people, and we're not prepared to take orders like we were in the Army. We have rights, and we were going to express our rights, and they just couldn't run over us. So that mentality was there. So into the 80s, when they had these, for example, I'll give you a story. In the 80s, when they had these coding machines they brought in, these were a line of desks where letters dropped in front of a person, and they used their right hand to key in the postal code, and the letter would then go into a machine and be sorted based on the keying. And obviously, the faster you key, the more letters are sorted. and the less labor you need to process the mail. And there was a lot of letter mail in those days, and these jobs were essential. So they would have these desks lined up in a row, 20 of them, and people sitting there keying away. They don't want you talking to your neighbor next to you. They just wanted you to work. But people naturally talk to each other. Or they take a break. They have to stretch. Their arms getting sore, their hands getting sore. One of the forms of intimidation that management would use is they would have 2 or 3 supervisors standing 20 feet back and just watching them. And everyone knew you're being watched behind your back. And that was the intimidation factor for them to speed up and don't talk. And they would tell these supervisors, just stand there and watch them. Most of the supervisors were men. Almost all of the coders were women. So there's that extra tension there, that gender interaction, which was very significant. The women were really upset about it. And we tried as a union to get them to stop this. And they said, we're not doing anything. We're not saying anything. They can, everything's fine. But that was all bullshit because they were using this as an intimidation factor. So some of the coders, some of the women, a couple of stewards who were in there, said, we're going to take this on. So what they did was, each of them had a piece of paper, a white piece of paper, 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and each of them wrote one word on that paper, and they taped it on their backs. And then when they had them all lined up, it basically said, coding is not a spectator sport. And every 5 or 6 people would have those things, and they would just go down. And they wore those on their backs for the entire first hour of their shift. The supervisors made a joke of it first, but then they started getting a bit embarrassed. And then when they realized nobody was going to take these things off, because they told them, you've got to take these things off, and people said, no. It's not hurting anything, I'm working. They got embarrassed and it stopped. And this whole intimidation of standing behind people stopped, and they were successful in this workplace action. But that's a really good example of creative activism on the work floor. It came directly from the members, and they weren't afraid. They fought it. And that's what the union needs in the workplace. You need that control where you can take over something that's a detriment to the workers. We had a similar incident later in the 1990s. We had a plant manager who was this new fellow who came in from somewhere, I don't know where, someplace outside of Manitoba. And he was one of these new, let's all work together, we're all friends, I'm your buddy type of managers. And he started a little promotional campaign where he took a cartoon character from Warner Brothers, the Tasmanian devil, which was some sort of animal that on the cartoons would speed up and twirl around and be really fast. And it was part of a speed-up program they wanted the workers to do. And they wanted to use this as a symbol of you work fast and get things done and everything's great and we're all friends. So they painted these big murals on these plywood walls of the Tasmanian devil. They had shirts made up, t-shirts made up, they had hats, baseball caps made up with the Tasmanian devil on it, and all these other things. They were using the logo everywhere. So in a meeting with this plant manager on another issue, we had a break, and I asked him, I said, what's with this Tasmanian devil? And he said, oh, well, it's just a way to get everyone working together as a group, it's harmless. I said, oh, okay. It must have cost you a lot of money to get the rights to use a trademark symbol like this. And then he looks at me and says, oh, it didn't cost us a cent. It's the only character from Warner Brothers that isn't copyrighted. I said, oh, really? Okay. Now, I looked out on the street. I didn't see any turnip truck out there. I didn't fall off a turnip truck that morning. Don't bullshit me about this. No company's going to let that happen. So, a call was made to Hollywood, to Warner Brothers, and a question was asked, and 2 weeks later, all of the plywood paintings were painted over, All of the t-shirts and hats and symbols were all removed and destroyed. And what I was told by some people on the inside later, that they had to pay a hefty fine to Warner Brothers for using their material without authorization. And within 2 or 3 months, this plant manager was transferred to a job, some middle management job in Toronto, where he basically disappeared into the woodwork somewhere and never to be seen again. The issue here was clearly no respect for the union. He came out and lied to us directly to our face and expected us just to believe him because he's the boss. Don't question me. Here's what I'm telling you, and I can do anything I want. And we said, no, you can't. And his bluff was called, he got caught, and they paid a price for it. And that's really important, because by doing that, everybody else in management found out about what happened because of the action that the Warner Brothers took with the post office. And they all realized the union has control. It was another way of showing control in the workplace that's really important. One of the problems that women faced in the post office was the way management treated them. In the 1970s, if you wanted a promotion to a higher classification, from a postal clerk to a postal dispatcher, it was by the merit system, where you had to undergo an interview. If you wanted to go from part-time to full-time, for example, as well, you had to go through an interview process, and they would rank you then and hire you. It produced some bad results. They would discriminate against women. We had one competition where a part-time member, she was a steward for part-timers. She applied to go full-time and was told, no, the competition was non-productive. We did a bit of digging and found out through the staffing clerks, who were union members and quite sympathetic, we found out that she was the only one who applied, and that they wouldn't hire her because she was a shop steward. We also had a situation with the promoting from a clerk to a dispatcher was by merit, and there were no women working on the dock where all the dispatchers worked. There were no women working there. In the early 80s, the collective agreement changed, and we got language that promotions like that were by seniority. And then women started applying, and based on their seniority, they started working on the dock. However, because it had been all male, there were no washroom facilities for women on that floor in the Winnipeg plant. So women had to go to another floor to use a washroom, and they were criticized, and management would go after them that they're going to washrooms too often. And they said, well, and it's taking too much time away from the work. And they said, well, build a washroom here. Oh, we don't have money for that. And they wouldn't do it. So women who were working there, and some of the brothers as well, they got together, and they found out that the Canada Post president was coming for a tour of the Winnipeg plant. And whenever a big shot from Canada Post comes in, or a government official, they always clean up the work floor, right? All the mail is moved away and hidden or whatever, and they clean it up for them. So the sisters decided that we're going to highlight the need for a washroom on this floor. So they got their hands on big pieces of cardboard, and they built a cardboard washroom on the dock, and they put a big sign over top of it saying, "Women's Washroom." They were all cleared off the floor when this big boss was coming in. And the story we heard from the supervisors who were trailing this fellow, because it's like a little entourage that follows him. He came there and he looked and he saw this cardboard, and he asked, what the hell is going on here? And they said, well, it's just, the workers here, the women, they want a washroom, and this is just a way of trying to show that they want it. He flipped out. He said, you mean you won't put a washroom here in the workplace for the women and save time, and so they don't have to travel upstairs and waste time going to a washroom? You won't put one down here? You put one down here immediately. They had a washroom built and set up there within a couple of months. Not a problem. But again, it was the workers getting together, saying, we're going to solve a problem, that we're not going to wait for the grievance procedure, which is fine, but we're not going to wait a year or 6 months for it to solve the issue. We're going to solve it right in here, right now. that was another example of being a successful approach to taking on an issue and solving the problem directly. And that, again, is control of the workplace, which is very important for workers anywhere. Creative activism sometimes can translate from a local issue to a national issue. And during one round of bargaining, there was an issue of a demand we had on safety boots. Safety boots are really important in any industrial workplace or in any place with heavy equipment. And we had demand that we had compensated more for them because they were expensive and we weren't getting very much money for it. So we had a demand at the national negotiations for this. And at one point, one of the employer representatives at bargaining made a comment about, people don't even wear safety boots, or they don't buy good ones. They just wear crappy boots anyway. So why should we give them more money? They don't need it. And that message went out to all the locals, and the locals were told, make your feelings known to this negotiator. So what a lot of members did across the country, and a lot of locals did, was they took all the old safety boots that people had sitting in their closets or sitting in their lockers at work, the old ones, and they put them in cardboard boxes and started mailing them to the Canada Post Negotiating Committee in Ottawa. And it wasn't just, 2 or 3 people, it was from across the country. And then the Canada Post negotiators finally came to the table and said, stop. We'll give you the increase. Stop it. We don't have any more room. We're storing them all in our basement. Why they're storing them, I don't know. But he said they stink. They're old boots. We don't want them anymore. And we won our demand on the cost of the boots. And we also taught them a lesson that if you want to be disrespectful to people, there's a price to pay for it. And the ironic thing about this was at that time, if you sent a parcel through the mail and you didn't put postage on it, it was the recipient who would pay the postage, or they would return it to the sender saying insufficient postage. So the way around that was you address it to Canada Post headquarters, and the return address you mark down is Canada Post, say in the Winnipeg plant. So if it comes back, it goes back to management, not back to the person who sent it. That way, you'd be guaranteed that somebody in Canada Post management would get the dirty boots. And it worked. It was a great victory in that sense. Sometimes when you have a message to deliver to politicians or to allies in the labor movement, you need to take some drastic measures to get that message across. And in Manitoba, the Manitoba Federation of Labor has a checkered history of on various issues. And I know that in the 1980s, I was a delegate to some Federation conventions, and CUPW wasn't shy about promoting resolutions and motions on issues like abortion or peace, but it was difficult. I was at a convention where there was a motion on the floor on the peace issue. An older fellow who's obviously a veteran got up, and his old speech was reading or reciting In Flanders Fields, that poem that came out in World War I. That's all he did. And he got cheers and applause, naturally people, because he was shaking and that. And one of our delegates got up and spoke about the need for peace and promoting peace, and there's too much warfare and the cost of war and all that. And he got booed. He got booed by some delegates. We had another person get up and speak on the abortion issue. And again, boos coming up from people that we shouldn't be dealing with this. This isn't a union issue. This is not proper to be here. And it was very frustrating. So the conventions also had a feature that I found personally distasteful, and as well as other CUPW delegates and delegates from other regions, other unions, was they had a tradition of inviting the labor minister to speak and give a speech at the MFL convention. And we questioned why. Why are you doing this? Gary Filmon was the leader of the Conservative government at the time. We would have a Conservative labor minister come in and talk to us. We didn't like that. And so we raised the issue with the MFL, and they wouldn't back down. they gave the excuse that, well, we have to work with this fellow in the future, so we don't want to be disrespectful. And we said, well, he's being disrespectful to workers. They're not promoting good legislation to protect workers or make life better. They're serving the interests of the employer. And we said, we're not going to put up with it. And somehow the rumor, or it got started, that we were going to walk out of the convention. Well, this was CUPW. They said we're going to starting this. And there was some fear that we would be able to pull it off. Now, it's a convention of 900 delegates. We're in Brandon. There's, I think, 12 CUPW delegates. But we did talk to people, and we had some support out there. We had support in the provincial government workers. We had support with city workers. We had support from various unions. But we didn't have a support from very much leadership. The leadership in the Federation of Labor from all the big unions was not too happy with us. But we kept pushing it. And so a convention started in Brandon. And it was slated to start at 9 o'clock in the morning. They wanted to know what we were going to do because the minister was going to be coming up within, I think, 20 minutes of the convention starting. And we told them, the walkout's still a possibility. Well, they wouldn't start the convention until they knew what we were going to do. So we were caught in a bit of a dilemma. They postponed the start of the convention. They just simply wouldn't start it. And we decided we have to do something. So we caucused outside of the convention, 12 of us, and everyone is waiting because they know something's going to happen. Now, just by coincidence, they had the CUPW delegation was allotted the space right at the front of the hall. So we were right in front of the main stage where everyone was sitting. And we didn't know really how much support we had for a walkout. And if you're going to pull a walkout, you better have damn good support, because if you only have 10% of the people walking out, it looks like a failure. So we had a discussion, and collectively we decided to not walk out, but instead we would turn our backs to the labor minister and when he spoke. And so that was the decision. We got the word out to people, but because of the short time frame, it was really difficult to get the word out to a lot of people. But by sitting in the front, we had an advantage, because when the labor minister came up, we turned our chairs around and turned our backs to him. But we were in the Brandon, I don't know what, rink or auditorium, or it's a place where they have all their cattle shows and all that. So it's cement floors, and we're sitting in steel frame chairs. Now, when you turn a steel frame chair on a cement floor, it makes that grating sound that just echoes in this big arena. And people started seeing, behind us, started seeing what we were doing. We're turning our chairs around, turning our backs to the minister. Well, all of a sudden, this grating sound spread through the whole arena, and it echoed in the arena. So it made it really loud, and people turning, and there were hundreds of people turning their chairs around. People, I would say a lot of them who wouldn't walk out, but on this one, they were cool. And we turned our chairs around. He was speaking, and he's facing the backs of so many people. But then you could hear, actually, that people who were a bit hesitant at first looked around and decided, well, I'm going to turn my chair around. And then every once in a while, you hear a couple more chairs moving. And so finally, we had a significant number of people having their backs to the minister. And that wasn't good enough, though. And then we started the clap, the slow clap like that. And it spread through the whole hall. And with the echoing in the arena, it was loud. The minister just finally said, "I give up," and stormed off the stage and walked away. And then everybody just cheered, even those people who didn't turn their chairs. Everyone cheered, "Yay, we won," and it was victory. And that was a good form of activism that had minimal risk, but was successful in changing the attitude of the leadership of the Federation of Labor. They never invited a conservative minister again. And they've invited ministers from the NDP, and each minister is judged on their own actions they take, or the government is judged on their own actions. And recently I was at a meeting in the Union Center here with the Manitoba Federation of Labour Retirees Group. And the Minister of Labour came in, and she gave us a presentation about some issues she's dealing with workers. So I got up and I told the story. And I told her very clearly, I'm happy you're here talking about workers' interests and not about the employer's interests, because the employer doesn't need a labor minister to talk about their interests. They have their own representatives to deal with it. They can talk in another forum, but when you're talking as a labor minister to workers, you better be talking about workers' issues. And she came over to me later and thanked me for my words, and I told the person who's running the retirees group, he was at that convention in the 90s. He remembers what happened there, and he also said that was a turning point for the Federation of Labor. So it was a good thing for postal workers to be involved in and lead, and I think we could only do that by having the action that we took on the picket line, the way we approached negotiations, and the changes we were able to make in our bargaining that impacted our members and society in general. Dealing with back-to-work legislation is difficult when you're doing it on your own. It requires leadership at a national level from labor. And I think what's been lacking in this country on a national basis is the Canadian Labour Congress has shied away from showing that kind of leadership that's needed. And they do that because of the pressure from some of their large affiliates who do not want to rock the boat necessarily with some of their major employers, and are worried about losing control. And I know that's a pretty harsh assessment of some of the leadership, but I think that's the structure that we have in place. So there needs to be, I think there needs to be recognition that the affiliates have to work together far more. When I first was elected to the national office to our CUPW's national office in Ottawa, the president at that time was Deborah Bork, and she was someone who believed in having discussions with the other major unions that were based in Ottawa on a regular basis. And she was insistent and carried through on this by having meetings, breakfast meetings, lunch meetings, whatever, with the leadership of the Canadian Union of Public Employees, the national president of the Public Service Alliance of Canada, and her. So you have CUPE, the Alliance, and CUPW, and I believe there was a couple of other national presidents that she would meet with on a regular basis as well. And they would be to discuss strategy on how to coordinate activities to try and deal with this issue. Because even though the other unions, for example, CUPE isn't a national organization, they have locals all across the country that negotiate separately and all that, you can still coordinate activities. And you can coordinate sympathy strikes, or you can coordinate work to rule campaigns or something like that. Deborah was really trying to work hard on that, but it became a problem dealing with people, lower leadership sometimes in those unions, who did not agree necessarily with their national president or national leadership. That was tough, and that's why I think the Canadian Labour Congress can play a more positive role, and should have played a more positive role. Jean-Claude Perrault was elected as a vice president of the Labour Congress. He broke the slate a couple of times. And when he was elected in the 1990s on there, he tried to coordinate some of that and met with some resistance as well. And I think he was treated unfairly, but that's the way it went. And we weren't able to get that together. Defying legislation is far more than simply staying out. It requires a lot of planning. And you need a plan in place before. I would argue, for example, a year before you're going to hit the streets, or possibly hit the streets, you need a plan in place, and how you build support, how you talk to people in the communities that are involved, how you talk to allies, how you talk to adversaries. And I know that sounds a bit strange that you talk to your adversaries, but in the 2000s, we went as a national, I was part of the delegation from the national office that went and met with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, which is no friend of labor. We met with the National Newspaper Organization, the Community Newspaper Association. We met with a couple of other business groups to talk about our issues. And the way we approached it was saying we have issues at the bargaining table for our membership. We want to hear what your issues are dealing with Canada Post as a provider. You use Canada Post so often, and so we'd like to talk about the issues. And nobody was under any illusions that we would become brothers and sisters in arms on this, but we listened to each other. And I think we benefited from listening to them. For example, with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, didn't know much about the organization, but when we went and visited them and talked to them, we discovered that it's a voluntary or a membership organization. You, as a business owner, you can join them, you can quit, and they would have organization drives similar to what a union would do in signing up new members. They would go out and sign up businesses, and the organizer who got signed up the most businesses in a month would get a plaque on the wall or win a car or some prize or something. And so to us, at least to me, that told me the story that their membership is fluid and that their membership wants representation, just like anyone does, but they also want to be treated fairly and with respect. And if we could talk maybe directly to some businesses that are impacted by postal negotiations or postal strikes, we could maybe make some inroads and maybe at the very least blunt some of the criticism. If that's the most we can achieve, that's not bad. We also discovered through some research that their claims that dozens of hundreds of businesses went bankrupt because of a postal strike weren't true. We researched it and discovered that year over year there was a few, 2, 3, maybe 4 businesses more went bankrupt as a result of the postal strike. So we were out to blow that argument out of the water. But naturally, that doesn't make front page a headline the way the CFIB could make it. It was buried on page 13, in a little clip. And that's a problem with the media. But at the same time, that helped us, because then we could use that when we're talking to politicians or others about the impact of a strike. I think the future, what needs to be done is more work in the community. I think that's going to be the place where we have to deal with it. It's just like what's going on now with the American fascism that's creeping over the border. Well, not creeping, I shouldn't say creeping, stampeding over the border with tariffs and threats of all kind. It's community organizing that's going to turn it around. That's how it'll be defeated here. And I think we need to take that, and we should be doing it early. We shouldn't be waiting for 2 months before a possible strike to do it. We need to do it early. We need to talk to people. We need to educate people. And I think part of that education is the everyday work we do in our communities. Like I go to a gym 3 times a week, and I take my water bottle with me, and I leave it sitting there, and I want to make sure I use my water bottle, so I put a sticker on it, job security for all. And everyone sees that, right? And at the very least, I hope they think about what that means. Because I know what people will say is, you can't have job security, like, that's just a dream, that's impossible. And my question is why? Why is it impossible to have job security in a society where one person can have a gazillion dollars, another person has, another gazillion, and they want to go to Mars, but you can't feed people, you can't guarantee people they're going to have an economic security and food on their table, yet you can go and buy a $500 million or $3, $4, $10 billion yacht to to put on a pier somewhere in Greece and say, well, I've achieved this success. You know, why not have job security? I had to get a new prosthetic leg, and the fellow who builds these legs, he said to me, he said, you know, the plastic cup on here, you know, some people like to put something on it, you know. I can arrange to have you know, the Bombers, Winnipeg Blue Bombers logo, or the Winnipeg Jets logo, or any sports team logo you want on there. That's really popular. So I thought about it, and I said to him, okay, I got a team. You can put on my prosthetic. How about the team from 1919 that went on a strike in Winnipeg? And so I did. I got it here in my leg right now, and when I go to the gym and I'm wearing my shorts, I walk around with my prosthetic like that. Everybody can see, you know, prison bars cannot confine ideas. That's the message. And I think it's a message that resonates with people. So there's different ways you can communicate. You know, you can put a lawn sign up when the Conservative government was trying to abolish all the school boards in Manitoba a few years ago. I had a sign up in my front lawn condemning it, or you know, it was the anti-Conservative sign. Nobody else in my neighborhood did, but I put it up there. Everyone saw it. You know, so I'll put up signs for different reasons, and other people put up signs too in elections. That's fine, but they know where you're coming from. When the strike started for the post office, I had a sign, I support postal workers. That was up on my front lawn. I'm sure a lot of people looked at it and said, who is this nut? But, you know, it's a way of getting the message out there. We were organizing courier companies in the 2000s. Across the country, we were trying to organize them, and we had some success in Montreal. It was mostly with the bike couriers. And we were able to get recognized as a bargaining agent for a few companies. But what we ran into was some companies were already organized by the Teamsters, but there was never a collective agreement negotiated. They had the recognition, they had the certification on paper. We discovered couriers didn't know they belonged to a union. They didn't pay dues because they didn't have a collective agreement. And we couldn't organize them then unless we filed for a decertification, and we did rating. And you know, rating was not, it's not productive. If workers already have a union, why are you going after organized workers? You should be going after the unorganized. So it was a problem. Deborah and I met with the national leadership of the Teamsters in Montreal, and the issue of working together came up. I'll be a bit generous in my comments. The Teamsters were only interested in generating dues money, and that's what they put to us. That they already had these certifications. There was no way they were going to give them to us, because we said we would take them and we would negotiate collective agreements. They said no. What they offered to do was, you can have the bike courier companies, but we get all of the car courier companies. There's far more car courier companies than bike couriers. We would have the short end of the stick, and it wasn't the answer. Like, to divide them up like that, the unions don't have it. I don't believe unions can do that. The workers should decide who they want to belong to and what they want. It's not the unions who decide. So we said no, it's up to the workers which union they want to belong to, and we're quite willing to put our name forward and give them a choice. Teamsters said no, we don't want to work together on that. So that didn't turn out very well for us, but I think on the bigger scale with courier being workers there being represented by the Teamsters, it's a situation where they've been established in there for a long time, and I think it's up to the workers to decide if they want to switch unions. And if they do, I'm sure CUPW, we were then, and I'm sure they are now, quite willing to look at representing them. But it's up to the workers to make that decision. It's not up to us and the Teamsters to sit down and cut a deal at a boardroom table, and then with the workers not having input into it. So if the workers want to switch unions, they're quite willing to, they can do that. That's under the labor code, they have that right. But I do think we need to work together, and I think that because Canada Post owns I think 94% of Purlator right now, that they obviously have a vested interest in how Purlator does. Generally, Purlator makes a profit, and I would argue that's because of the wages and working conditions are inferior to the ones that the membership of CUPW has. But I think there still could be some cooperation, and I don't know what happened in this last strike. I'm retired now, and so I wasn't privy to all the information, but I know in the past we've tried to ensure that no struck work goes to any other company, and the Teamsters have been, on paper, in practice, have been pretty good in honoring that pledge. Whether mailers decide to ship their parcels through Purlator instead of Canada Post, that's the mailer's choice. And I didn't see anything, and I didn't hear anything in this last strike of Canada Post parcels being delivered through Purlator. But I do know that companies will switch providers, and I'm sure some of the Canada Post customers went to Purlator to have their parcels delivered, or to UPS or FedEx. That's their right to do that, and I don't think we can stop that. We can only stop it if the workers at, say, Purlator decide they're going to take some action. UPS is organized by the Teamsters in Canada and the United States. FedEx is non-union for the most part, both in the United States and Canada. In the United States, the setup was in the early 1970s. The owner of FedEx, Fred Smith, I believe his name is, was able to get recognition under American labor law that the entire organization would have to be organized nationwide, and it's under one of the labor law acts down there, which made it virtually impossible to do a national campaign. But yet there's been some organizing of FedEx in the United States with subsidiaries or warehouses, and that's happened. Those have been really tough, and it's not always guaranteed you'll get a collective agreement, but there's been some aggressive organizing of small units. In Canada, FedEx is non-union, and we tried to organize them. We had a campaign going on in Montreal. We had some people who were interested, some workers who were interested in joining CUPW. We launched a campaign there, and we were unable to get enough people to even have a vote for certification. But it showed some promise for a while. It's been really difficult. FedEx has a very aggressive anti-union campaign in their workplace, and have threatened their workers a lot. Like, they use fear and intimidation that you're going to lose your job, will shut down your workplace if you unionize. In Quebec recently, the Amazon, they organized an Amazon warehouse. Amazon responded by shutting 7 warehouses in Quebec and contracting them out to small companies. Those small companies can obviously be organized, but it's not the same. They don't have the same resources to provide improvements in wages and benefits. So that basically has put a real damper on organizing. But I still think there's potential. I think that the workers in these warehouses especially, or the drivers, if they have issues that aren't being resolved, there's always an opportunity for them to do something about it. It's up to unions to make themselves available and to see if they can deal with those issues. Currently, we're trying to reestablish our Workers Organizing Resource Center in Winnipeg, which has a mandate of organizing new workers into the CUPW. And hopefully within this spring, we're going to be able to start launching some organizing campaigns in the courier and postal sector, in the logistics sector in Manitoba, and hopefully have some success. Whether we look at Amazon or other companies, that's all up in the air right now. But it's something that we need to do because the market If non-union providers are not organized, it drives down the wages and benefits of those people who are organized. And we're seeing that right now in this current round of bargaining that we just saw in the past few months. Canada Post wants to introduce weekend delivery people at a lower rate of pay than the traditional delivery people, and they would only work 1 or 2 days a week. So you're looking at the maximum 16 hours a week employment, in some cases maybe only 6 or 8 hours at a lower rate of pay, just above minimum wage. And that's not what society needs. We need to have full-time jobs at a decent rate of pay. So as long as there's employers like Canada Post and others that will do this, unions need to be aggressive in how they organize. The Organizing Resource Center in Winnipeg, it's been around for 26 years now. It has a mandate of helping unorganized workers fight for their rights, whether it be employment standards, termination of employment, or any other issue, disability payments. It's also to work with community groups. They're like-minded community groups that we can use the facility for meetings. We can get to know other groups and their concerns, and we can share our concerns with them and work together for a better Winnipeg, and also to organize the unorganized into union, into CUPW. And it's had some successes. It's had some downtimes. We've had to move a couple times, and it's been difficult. Winnipeg is not especially the core area of Winnipeg is not a very stable environment economically. A lot of people suffer, and we've seen the impact of it. So we're trying to reestablish it now, and I'm working with a few other people from CUPW and some others to try and get ourselves going again. We have a relationship with the Lower Income Intermediary Project that's currently working out of the Work Center, and hopefully we'll be able to kickstart more activity going on in Winnipeg in regards to organizing and community work. A lot of it in the past was on community work. We had a list of about a dozen to 15 different groups that we were associated with and who were actively participating in Work Center activities. Yeah, organizing people in the courier and logistics sectors is difficult work sometimes. And we had an example in Winnipeg where in the 1991 strike, Canada Post hired scabs. And what they did was hired a company here in Winnipeg called Zipper Courier to deliver parcels during the strike. And what that involved was, initially, was Zipper Courier drivers coming with their vehicles into the Winnipeg plant, where we had our picket lines set up. And it was ugly. We knew what they were coming in for, so we saw them drive in empty and try to drive out with parcels that we would normally deliver. So there was confrontations on the picket line, and it got bad. We wouldn't let them go out. There was some damage to some vehicles that they attributed to picketers. We had the police there breaking our picket line to get them through, and we wouldn't let them go through. We had people bouncing off of windshields on top of vehicles. So it got pretty ugly. After the strike was settled and we were back at work, a couple of years after that, we were approached by some couriers in Winnipeg from Zipper Courier. We said, "We saw how hard you fought for your members. We want you to fight for us. The owner we have here is a real bastard. He's, we're getting shortchanged. We don't make a lot of money." And that was true. They didn't. In fact, they got cheated a lot. But anyways, they wanted to join CUPW. So we launched a campaign. We signed up the majority. We applied for certification, and we were successful. But the story never ends there when you're fighting a legal fight. It was pushed by the company as far as they could. Eventually, the issue went to the Supreme Court of Canada, which is really unheard of. But it went there, and the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. They dismissed it, or we won. And we were certified for them. And I remember one of our initial meetings with a group of these couriers, a couple of them got up and said, we remember you guys. You were the ones that were smashing my windshield. You were pounding on the hood of my car. It cost me a lot of money, to fix it. I said, well, yeah, you guys cost us a lot of money too by delivering parcels or scabbing during the strike. So it goes both ways, doesn't it? And they said, yeah. And we said, well, that was then, this is now. What do you want to do? We'll sign a card. So we were successful. We negotiated collective agreements. The company has changed hands a few times. They're now part of a national company called Transforce, and they're still members of CUPW. They had an Amazon contract here for a while for deliveries until Amazon introduced their own delivery people. A lot of people got laid off, but the rest of them stuck with CUPW, and we still negotiate collective agreements for them. But it's an example of how taking the fight on leads to people wanting to join a union because they see the benefits from it. One of their members now is working full-time in the regional office here for the union. He's dealing with collective agreement issues pertaining to the post office, which he's never worked in, but he's learned the language of the contract. He's learned how to argue arbitrations. He's successful in what he's doing. So it's an opportunity for members from all the different bargaining units to be part of CUPW, and we should be really proud of that. Yeah, in our organizing work, we've had some interesting successes. In Nova Scotia, for example, we end up organizing the paramedics that work in Nova Scotia for the entire province. So if you phone 911 in Nova Scotia, you're talking to a CUPW member. If you have a paramedic who comes out to assist you following an accident or some trauma, it's a CUPW member assisting you. We then negotiated we then organized the paramedics in Prince Edward Island. They're members of CUPW, same situation. We're looking at trying to expand that to other parts of the Atlantic region. And we've been quite successful in negotiating collective agreements with Nova Scotia. That local has been around for years now, and they've gone through multiple rounds of bargaining. We're still representing them, and they're still happy to stay with CUPW. It's an example of where you can organize outside the traditional areas of postal services and still be successful and convince people to join. I think we should have done more of it, but it's a matter of the union willing to commit resources, time, and energy to that, and sometimes that's in competition with the work we normally do, representing 55,000 members at the post office. We had a successful organizing campaign with the rural route couriers. These were people delivering mail in the rural and suburban areas of the country who were independent contractors. And under the Canada Post Act, they were not allowed to unionize. There's a big provision in there that barred them from unionizing. Regardless, they applied for certification as a group in the late 1980s and were certified by the Canadian Labour Board. Canada Post took that decision to court, and the Court of Appeal accepted Canada Post's challenge and said they were legally unable to organize. And that basically killed the whole unionization of these workers. In 1996, CUPW at its national convention authorized a national organizing campaign of these people. Despite the fact that it's illegal under the law, we said we're going to organize them. These people are paid garbage wages, they're mistreated, they're exploited, they're 70% women. There's a trend with Canada Post about trying to put women in lower paid work. So we said in 1996 we're going to commit to it. We organized, we knew there were people out there who wanted to unionize, so we were able to get these people who volunteered from the Atlantic region, from parts of Ontario and the West, to form a national organization. And we were quite blunt about it. We fronted them. We committed anywhere between $225,000 to $250,000 a year for 6 years into organizing this group. And what they did was go around the country talking to these rural delivery people. And they're suburban people as well, about the need to unionize. In 2003, I was the national officer responsible for organizing then, and we launched a national campaign to organize 6,000 workers. We had people going out throughout the country. I believe we had close to 100 people going around signing up these people. It was hard to find some of them. Some of them were easy to find, but some of them working in rural areas, like good luck finding them, because they would go into a small post office, pick up their mail, and drive down a country road, and that would be it. And some of these routes were quite small, 2 hours a day. Some of them were only 3 days a week. It wasn't just 5 days a week everywhere. So we were able to sign up a solid majority of them. In the end, I think we signed up about 74% of them into signed union cards. That number was never released, but now it's 25 years later. Who gives a shit now? But we signed up the vast majority. We submitted the cards to the Canadian Labour Board, Canadian Industrial Relations Board. They did their standard checks. They phoned a number of people just to make sure that you signed a card. Everything was okay. The next challenge we had was negotiating a collective agreement. In the 2003 round of bargaining, we had our bargaining for the urban group, and one of our demands in our urban group was that Canada Post recognize all the rural delivery people as employees of the corporation, and that they have rights and benefits, and we negotiate a collective agreement for them. Now, what we were really, in a sense, saying is you're going to take 6,000 contractors and convert them to employees overnight, and they have rights under a collective agreement. Canada Post just went crazy. Not a chance. If you think you're going to get us to do that, forget it. We can't do it. It's impossible. All these things were flying around. And we said, well, you're not going to get a collective agreement with the urban unit. Like this is part of our demands. It's a major part of our demand. Finally, they relented. But in true employer fashion, they said, okay, but we can't talk about their working conditions at the main table. We have to set up a subsidiary group meeting in a different location, and we can talk about their issues there. So I was designated as the lead on this. There's 3 of us, met with 3 of their people, but it was in the Canada Post headquarters, not with the main group who were embedded in a hotel negotiating the urban group. We were meeting with Canada Post in this room in Canada Post headquarters, and we started getting into it. But one thing I realized very quickly, we didn't know exactly all the working conditions they faced and how they were paid and all that. It's this great mystery. What I realized very quickly was Canada Post representatives that we were dealing with didn't know either. It was just incredible. They had no idea how they assessed their routes or how they were paid. And it became clear that what they did was throw a dart at a dartboard. They would just sort of build a route. They would think of an amount to pay them, and that would be it. And they would bid as contractors, they bid on 5-year contracts. What became very obvious after we talked to dozens and dozens and hundreds of these workers was you could have a 5-year contract where you got wage increases a contract increase every year. When you go to renegotiate your contract for another 5 years, they would want you to go back to the original first-year contract value that you had when you started your 5 years. They wouldn't take the 5th year amount and then build on that. They want you to go back. We found out that people were forced to pay bribes to the transportation officers from Canada Post, that if you gave them money or a holiday or a gift, you'd have a better chance of getting your contract. We were never able to confirm this because people were afraid to talk about it, but There was hints that sexual favors were demanded by some people, but that one we couldn't get any details on. People wouldn't talk about that for very clear reasons. But we dealt with that, and then at one point we were having trouble dealing with this issue, and we had a meeting with the president of Canada Post. His name was Andre Ouellette. He was a former cabinet minister with the Pierre Trudeau government, and been around the liberal circles in Quebec for quite a while. And he was an interesting character, but he was the president of Canada Post. So we had a meeting with him about this, and he was very dismissive about these people, about these workers, that they were only in it for a few, I think he called it pin money, which I discovered, I didn't know what that meant at first, but I think that just means that it's basically a derogatory comment against women who just want some money, that they can go and buy some extra things for themselves, and they kept the money on a pin on their apron. Very derogatory, but that's the comment he used. And we had produced a film about comparing the working conditions of Canadian rural delivery people with the unionized people in the United States. And we produced a film on that, and we gave him a copy of this and said, you should watch this and tell us what you think about this. And it compared very clear contrasts. It's called Basic Rights, was the name of the film. And so he took it, and we met him subsequently. We had another meeting with him, and Deborah asked him about, what do you think of the film? He said, well, I thought it was interesting, but I showed it to my wife. My wife was really upset. She was outraged. She told me, you better settle. You better get a deal for these people. And we discovered later the reason his wife was so upset was she had an aunt or a grandmother or someone in her family, a woman, who was a rural route contractor at one point. And she remembers how bad she was treated by the post office and how little money she made doing that work. And she was so upset by what she saw in that video. We think she probably got out a sharp stick or something and poked Ouellette in his side, and he agreed to negotiate a contract for them. And that negotiations was really tough because we weren't able to achieve equality. And the last outstanding issue, we met with them on a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. We were supposed to start meeting and deal with it. They canceled the meetings all day. We waited all day. They said, we'll meet 2 hours from now, 3 hours from now. We were up all night, and 6 o'clock Sunday morning, we sat down. The last issue on the table was putting these contractors into the defined benefit pension plan that everyone else had. And the corporation didn't want to do it. They said, we'll pay into an RRSP plan for them. We said, that's not good enough. And they said, well, we're not going to do it. And the lead negotiator, the chief negotiator we had for the urban side, she said very clearly, we don't have something on this, there's no deal. Everything's off the table then. And we 6 o'clock in the morning, we looked at it, we looked them in the eye and said, defined benefit pension plan. They said, we have to make a phone call. They came back 20 minutes later, and I swear, I thought their representative was going to choke or throw up. Because I guess what they did was call Ouellette, and he made the call. He says, yeah. And they said, you've got it. They're in the defined benefit pension plan. She just about choked on that, which spit that out. And we had to sit there very calmly, because you don't want to give away your position. We sat there very calmly and said, okay. And we had a deal then, and it was a deal for the rural people and for the urban people. Now, we had a long fight for many years to try and get equality, but in the 2016 round of bargaining, pay equity was on the table, and we had a special mediator come in, William Kaplan, who's now the fellow on the commission that's dealing with the resolution of the strike from December. He came into the meeting, and on the issue of the pay equity. We hammered out a deal with him on how it would look, and we made it very clear. Pay equity, yeah, they're okay. Hearings, we'll have some hearings, but we don't want to be in the situation that the Public Service Alliance was in, where they took them 30 years to get a settlement, and it ended up being only 50 cents on the dollar. We don't want to be in a situation that the Postmasters Union was in, where they filed a complaint in the early 1990s and it still wasn't resolved by 2016. We want something resolved quickly. So we ended up negotiating an agreement where pay equity would have a process that would last 18 months. And we were successful. It was a lot of hard work. There was no amount of bluster would get you a pay equity agreement. We had a very serious, and we had a committed group of union leadership who were willing to fight for this. They did really good work. We had an outside consultant come in who was excellent, and we were able to achieve pay equity. The result of that was back pay for people who had been working since going back as far as 2003, or 4, I should say, when we first negotiated. And there was a story, one of the people who were on the original negotiating committee for the rural people, she told a story about her husband, who was also a rural delivery person. He got his back pay check, and he said, you know, Alice, I think they made a mistake on my back pay. I thought I'd be getting more. It's only for $1,500. I thought I'd be getting more. And so she took the check and she looked and says, dear, you should put on your reading glasses. It's for $15,000. When I heard that story, I almost cried. There's a rural delivery person working in this office right here across the hall. He got a check for $12,000. It was great. But it didn't come easy. You had to fight for it. And you had to be strong, and you had to take a leadership role where you follow your principles and you work for it, and then you're successful. Yeah, the success we had in negotiating for the rural people was incredible. But even in 2003, when we were negotiating the first collective agreement, to have 6,000 workers go directly into a defined benefit pension plan was incredible. At a time where the past 20 years certainly or more, defined benefit pension plans have been disappearing everywhere, it seems, being replaced by defined contribution plans, which is not as beneficial for workers. It was really incredible to have them in there. And now, after, I guess, 23 odd years later, or whatever it is, from 2004, 21 years, people are starting to see some real benefits from having that pension plan. People who are retiring now are getting, not a great pension, but they're getting a pension based on what they've contributed over 20 odd years in some cases. And that's significant for a lot of people. And it's an index pension plan. They paid for the indexing, workers paid for it. It's not free. And so they're getting a pension that's going to grow over the years. And that's something that's remarkable. And I think that these workers deserve it. It's not something to sneeze at. Quite often, employers will try to use different ways of motivating workers to reduce labor costs. And that happens in the private sector, the public sector. They'll give awards out if you can come up with a way to do something more efficiently. That's the code word they use, more efficiently. And what it really means is cut labor costs. How can we do something where we don't need as many people? Because quite often management doesn't know how the work process functions. The problem is individuals in the workforce will sometimes come up with ideas where they don't think them through. They don't realize the domino effect of something, where you could put other workers in danger, there'd be safety issues, or the net result is you just lose jobs and nothing else changes. So Canada Post is no different than other companies. They introduced a an awards program. It was a national awards program that if you submitted an idea and it worked out and there was a savings involved, you would win a prize or given money or whatever. And people naturally jump at that. Hey, I get to win something, right? It's like buying a scratch ticket, right? You might win something. They called it the Einstein Awards, because if you came up with a really good idea, you're just as smart as Einstein. So, pumping people up, right? I'm a smart guy. Well, we were at a meeting I was the local president then, and we were at a meeting with Canada Post, and we had some issues that we were dealing with, and so we wanted some things changed, and we said, you need to do this, this, and this, and our position was that you need more people to do it, or you can't cut positions because it won't happen. So one of their little bell ringers was sitting at the table and said, that sounds like a really good idea. Why don't you put in a suggestion under the Einstein program? And I guess I was in one of those moods, because I looked at this fellow and I just figured, what? And I looked at him and all of management and I said, do you know that Einstein was a socialist? So if you want me to put ideas in about socialism, I'm quite happy to do that. Let's talk about a reduced work week with no loss of pay. Let's talk about more vacation pay. Let's talk about health and safety issues that protect workers and not damage workers. Let's talk about respect in the workplace. You want socialist ideas? We'll give you lots of socialist ideas. Just get ready to get all the letters. And they just stood back and, whoa, what are you talking about? These people didn't know a thing about Einstein. And they went ahead and used his caricature and name to promote a speed-up campaign to reduce labor costs and cut jobs. And they just sat there, well, we didn't know. And I just thought, another way to get control of the situation. And so we put out bulletins then, talking, Einstein Awards or job-cutting awards. What's going on? And we put in our bulletins, Einstein was a socialist. Is Canada Post a socialist company? Not a chance. So we milked this one for all we could, right? And it just, in Winnipeg at least, it fell flat on its feet, right? It just didn't go anywhere, because members realized then how they were being manipulated and used. But when he said to me, put in an Einstein suggestion, I couldn't hold back. And I don't like blowing up in front of management, but this one, it was worthwhile. In CUPW, we've always had a concern that because of our high profile, that the government was monitoring our activities. And in the 1970s, when the RCMP were investigating everyone, including terrorists or suspected separatists in Quebec, they were also watching CUPW. And we were able to confirm that later through the release of some, we put in freedom to information requests, and we received redacted transcripts of someone who was planted by the, I guess it was the RCMP in those days, in general meetings of the Vancouver local of CUPW. And these were transcripts describing what happened at the meetings. They would redact the names, and in some cases the dates or different bits of it. But there was enough left in there that you could tell that there was someone there who was reporting on who said what and what their plans were. And it was an attempt to discredit the union. They wanted to show that we were being infiltrated by communist agitators, and that their real goal was not to represent the members, it was to destabilize the government of Canada. So we were able to get copies of those. We also found out through other information that in the 1990s, CSIS, which had taken over the surveillance part of it, had an agent stationed in, who was identified as an employee of an importer-export company. And he was stationed in the big sortation facilities in Toronto, in the Gateway facility especially, which handles all the international mail, and it's a huge facility where there's, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 people overall working there. And he was, we're not sure exactly what he did, but we know that there was attention paid to our bulletins that went out, and that he was used to monitor the activities of the union, as well as look at what else was going through the mail system there. So it was a sort of a dual focus, and we had concerns over that. We raised the issue with politicians, but we're basically told it's classified, it's national security issues, we can't talk about it. But we were able to dig up enough information to satisfy our concerns that there were things going on. In one round of bargaining, there was a feeling that, I think this was in the early 90s, there was a feeling that our phone lines were being tapped in Ottawa. And some people put it to a test once that they made a phone call. A phone call was made out of one of the union's phones that at 10 o'clock that night, there would be, the people would be ready at the apartment building where the president of Canada Post lived. There was no such plans to do anything, but that was the call that was made, and we had people stationed in the area that evening to watch what happened. At about 15 or 10 minutes to 10 o'clock, police cars with their lights going on all came and swarmed the building and were parked outside the building with all their lights going. So they knew that something was going to happen, but nothing did happen. There was no plans to do anything. It was just a test to see if they were monitoring us. We had to then have our offices swept for bugs and for other things to see if they were monitoring us. We never found anything, and the company we hired to do it was quite blunt with us. If they're going to monitor you, they'll do it remotely. We had a concern that our office in Ottawa on Bank Street was 3 blocks away from a 11-story building, office building, that you could see through the windows of our office. And a year earlier, there was a story published in the Globe and Mail about this office building. And the reason it was published was the reporter discovered that it's an 11-story building, that the government had rented the entire building, but only used the top 2 floors. The main floor was retail space that was rented out to, convenience store or florist or whatever. But the floors from 2 to 9 were empty, and 10 and 11 were rented by CSIS. It was a security building, and they didn't want anyone else on those floors. So some people at our national union got very concerned that we were being monitored from this, because there was a direct vision to our office, and that they were using, cameras or microphones or whatever to spy on us. There's no way to tell if they did or not. You can't track that. But that was enough concern that this building was there that was mostly empty, rented by the government for their spy agency. Canada Post was quite aggressive. It's been quite aggressive over the decades in introducing new technologies, and it's generally not to a benefit of the workers. So when they switched over to a postal code in the late 60s, early 70s, it was a particularly difficult situation for the union. The corporation wanted to introduce a lower paid classification to do the coding work, and we were adamant that no new classification should come in, because we knew that was a threat to everyone. So the union, in response, launched a campaign to boycott the postal code. And we didn't know how. I don't know what happened at the national level then. I wasn't even working at Canada Post at that time. But looking back and talking to people who were there, it was a sense that we had to do something to get this publicized. And the goal was to force Canada Post not to bring in a lower wage rate for workers. So it was quite an aggressive campaign. We had envelopes printed up that we would give to people that would say boycott the postal code on the bottom of it. We had T-shirts made up, and I still have my T-shirt that I got in 1975. It says boycott the postal code. It wouldn't fit me now, but I still have that T-shirt. We were quite aggressive in pushing this, and it drew attention to what was going on at Canada Post. And that was really important in building up ally support, because people are afraid of change, and that's normal, but they're really afraid of change if the change means they're going to lose something they already have, or they're going to suffer economically because of that. So people don't want to see that. So the campaign was an approach that I think was contributed to the success of Canada Post backing off of the lower wage rate. But it's only part of that campaign, because we also then in the 1980s we used stickers a lot. And I know they're not used as much now, but we use stickers, various types of stickers, to promote issues. And we would put these stickers up in the workplace. And it drove them crazy, because stickers would be on the walls, they'd be on the equipment, people would put them on their lockers, they'd wear them on their work aprons, stickers, buttons, and all this. And somebody got the idea at the national level to, if we're sending a letter to the employer, standard procedure for the employers, we send them a letter on our position on something, they would copy it and send it to all the people in the regions and everything. We put the sticker on the letter, which meant they would have to photocopy the letter with our slogan on it and distribute it to all of their management representatives. Well, they did that for a bit, and then they just said, no, we're not going to do this anymore. Why should we be printing copies and distributing your slogans to our people? And they refused to accept the letters. And we said, you can't do that. We sent you the letter. You've been notified officially. And it ended up going in front of an arbitrator in a case, where the arbitrator said, well, of course you have to accept it. You've accepted it. You can't ignore it because you don't like the sticker that's on it. So again, it was this issue of saying, we control things and we can have an impact on you. But it was a way of using something like that to drive a message home that was minimal cost to us and forced Canada Post to see something that they didn't want to see all the time. It was a very effective campaign that way. We also, in the Winnipeg plant, some people were very aggressive in where they put stickers, and they were up in a lot of places. And sometimes I often wondered how they could get to that height to put a sticker up somewhere. But the plant manager at that time was very upset with it. So there was a meeting with the local president and myself, and we went into his office, and he wanted to tear a strip off us and lecture us about being children and putting stickers up, and you can't do that and all that. So as we're talking to him, Dale, who was sitting next to me, had a big sticker that said "The struggle continues," and it was a rectangular sticker, and we're sitting in front of him and at his desk, and so I'm distracting the plant manager talking to him, and while he's doing that, Dale's peeling the sticker off and sticks it on the front of his desk. So "The struggle continues" is on the front of his desk as he's talking to us, lecturing us on putting stickers up on the workplace. So we finished our meeting and we beat it out of there fast. Like, we didn't want to be there. But as we're leaving out of his office and on the work floor, we hear him start yelling, because I guess he came around and saw the sticker on there. But we drove another point home, right? You want to lecture us on this? Basically, fuck you. Here's another sticker. Now, he hired a private cleaning company to come in and clean all the stickers off everywhere in the plant, and sent us the bill for around $500. Said, you have to pay this. And we said, no, you can't prove we put the stickers up. We're not paying this bill. It's yours. What we did do, though, was put more stickers up. And we layered the stickers up. He finally gave up, right? He realized he's fighting a losing battle. But the one offshoot of that happened was we took a tour of the Perlator plant here in Winnipeg by the airport for some reason. They wanted to talk to us about how they do things at Perlator and try to introduce some of their work methods to us. And so we went for a tour, and they shared equipment with the Perlator, Canada Post. So Canada Post containers that were used in the Winnipeg plant we found them in the Perlator facility. So we raised the issue, and they said, well, we can use them wherever we want. We own the company. So if we want to put Canada Post monotainers in Perlator, we'll do it. You can't stop us. Well, these monotators had our stickers on them. And the workers there all saw these stickers like CUPW, more day jobs, better pay. These stickers were all over. And there were no Teamster stickers anywhere. In fact, there's only one Teamster bulletin board in the whole facility, and it was locked up behind glass. So when we were going through and taking this tour, the workers there found out who we were, and we had people coming up to us saying, "Organize us, we want to join your union. We saw your stickers, you're right, you're right." And we had to tell them, you can't do that, it's we're not going to be raiding the Teamsters. When we explained to them, if you want to switch unions, there's a way to do it and all that. But that was an offshoot of our sticker campaign. And I think that's one thing that's lacking, and that's just my perception, that there's one thing lacking now is that aggressive approach in the workplace. And maybe people are afraid to do it. Maybe there's too much surveillance now. But I don't see a lot of people wearing buttons or stickers in the workplace. I see lots of pictures of our members in the workplace, but very few wear buttons anymore. And that was one of the staples of organizing in the workplace, of creative activism, is having that union presence, even in a small, sometimes insignificant way, but it's still the union is there. So you're a shop steward, you're servicing the members dealing with their issues, their problems, but you're wearing a union button. And maybe they'll wear a union button down the road, or when negotiations comes up, they'll be more open to wearing a sticker or putting a sticker on their locker or a sticker on some equipment without worrying about the risk associated with that. Because it's a gradual build-up you have to do with most members. But I love the stickers like, job security for all. Job security today and tomorrow. During the 1980s, Canada Post was looking at the drive to bring in lower paid workers. And at that time, if you were a casual, that's what they were referred to as, now they're called temporary workers, but they were casuals, you were paid at a lower pay rate. And in Winnipeg, the only casuals ever used was at Christmas time when the volumes are really heavy, and they would bring in extra people just to move mail around. But they would never use them outside of the Christmas operation. There was a staffing issue in Winnipeg where they weren't filling vacant positions, they weren't staffing the full-time positions, and they were moving more positions off the day shift to the less desirable night shift and evening shift. So their response to solving the staffing issue was to bring in casuals in the summer to work, and people were furious, and we were all furious about that. We said there's ways to do it, but that means proper staffing and hiring people. But they didn't want to hire regular employees. So they notified us they were bringing in, 10 casuals in. And the membership were quite upset. And we decided as a local to take the issue on. But at that time, for different reasons, we had some vacancies in our local executive. Our local president was on vacation out of the province at the time, so I was acting president. And we had depleted leadership in place. So we had to do something, and we decided we were going to walk out. If they brought casuals in without the proper staffing being done, we were walking out. And I went for a week before they were bringing them in. I went into the plant on every shift, every section, and had meetings with members on the work floor, in the lunchrooms, talking about what's going to happen and why we're doing it, to make sure everyone understood. I called our national office for help, right? So I talked to the person who was our first national vice president, and I explained the situation to him, and he was very supportive. And I said, well, okay, what can you do to help us? And he said, well, your brother, he says, if you've got the members on your side, I don't think you need my help. Good luck. Click. And hung up on me. And he did the right thing, though. Because what he basically said to me is, why do you need help? You got it under control. So that night came. They were coming in at 11 o'clock at night. And we made a decision that we're walking out at 10:30. We're pulling out the entire evening shift at 10:30. We'd set up a picket line. and we'd empty out the plant. We'd contacted the media to make sure we got some media coverage on this, because to us it was an important issue of full-time employment versus temporary casual employment, and that's an issue that resonates in a lot of areas. So I was there, and it's a hot summer night, as some would say. The dock area of the plant, which is probably was our most militant section at the time, they were quite happy with walking out, but they wanted to be the first. So it was 10:30 was everyone put down, tools down, everyone out at 10:30. Well, at 10:20, all of a sudden the dock walks out. And they come out and they grab the signs and they're cheering and the fists in the air and all this. And I figure, well, what the hell? Is anyone else going to be coming out? So, 10:30 approaches, and I'm looking up the escalator from the outside of the employee's entrance. I don't see anyone. And I'm just in a panic, right? And then all of a sudden I hear it. You don't see anything. You hear the feet on the escalator, the feet stomping, and it just started building up like a crescendo coming out. And all of a sudden it exploded onto the street. Like there was probably 200 workers in the building that night, maybe 300, and they just poured out onto the street. We had picket signs for them. Traffic was blocked off. The cops were stopping the traffic, and we just took over. And it felt really good. But then there was a concern that midnight shift is coming in, and we wanted to make sure they didn't go in, right? So we had a strong picket line. But on the midnight shift, we had a group of individuals who 5 years earlier in the 1981 legal strike had crossed the picket line. They'd scabbed. And there was just 5 or 6 of them, and they were coming into where they were still in the midnight shift, and they were coming in. They came in together. And I saw them, and I knew all of them. And I saw them standing by the library across the street from the employee's entrance on Smith Street. And I figured, what the hell are they going to do? So they looked over at me, and they looked at the door. They looked back, and they just went like this, see ya, and turned around and went home. And I thought, wow, they were willing to scab during a legal strike, but at an illegal strike, they refused to cross a picket line. Go figure, right? What the hell is going on? So we kept out the midnight shift. The day shift wouldn't go in. When the evening shift came back, they didn't go. The evening shift at 3 o'clock, and the part-timers at 6 o'clock. Nobody went into work, and then we had to deal with it. What do you do? We caught the tire, caught the car. What's the resolution? And the employer blinked. The employer contacted us and says, okay, we're willing to talk about staffing. And we just went, wow, got out of that one good. But it was obviously because the member, they couldn't get members crossing the line. And they were told by their bosses in Ottawa, settle it. So we had a meeting with them, and we got 50 more jobs reinstated on the day shift. And we got, I think, 35 new full-time positions created, staffed, I should say. And the 5 or 10 casuals did come in and work, but in exchange for that, we got the staffing model we wanted done. So it was a successful wildcat, but it was, and it was great for the members. Like the members were pumped to be able to go on a wildcat like that. So it was wonderful, and we got something positive out of it. And I found out after all of this, Winnipeg processing plant was the last major processing plant in the country that never used casuals outside the Christmas operations. So we were the standout in the country that didn't have them, and all the other locals said, well, we got casuals, they're in all the time. What's the problem with Winnipeg? Well, the problem was they wouldn't staff the full-time positions properly, they wouldn't staff day jobs properly. So it was a success in that way, but it was also a good time.